Have you ever felt emotionally exhausted, even though nothing big happened that day? Have you ever walked into a room, seen your mother's face, and instantly felt your whole body tighten as if you had to manage her mood before even noticing your own? If you have, it's not because you're overly sensitive. It's because you were trained to carry a type of wound most daughters never talk about. You know that feeling. When your mother sighs heavily, and without a single word, you already know something is wrong, and you feel responsible. When her sadness becomes the oxygen in the house, and you're the one holding your breath, it's a strange kind of heaviness, not loud, not violent, but quietly suffocating. You grow up scanning her voice, her footsteps, the way she closes a door, and your nervous system stays alert even when you're supposed to relax. It's the kind of emotional weight that follows you into adulthood, into friendships, into love, into the way you show up in the world. And the hardest part? Most people tell you, just set boundaries, just don't overthink, just let it go. But you can't. Because this wound didn't start in adulthood. It started in childhood long before you had the language to understand it. In this video, we're going to uncover that hidden wound. We'll explore why daughters absorb their mother's emotions, what it does to your identity and relationships, and the steps you can take to break free from a role you were never meant to play. Let's begin. There's a reason daughters often feel like they're wired to sense their mother's emotions before anyone else does. And it's not because they're dramatic, or overly empathetic, or too emotional. It's because, from an early age, many daughters learn that their emotional safety depends on understanding their mother's emotional state. Imagine a child who notices the subtle shift in her mother's breathing, the tightness in her jaw, the way her shoulders drop when she's overwhelmed. Her nervous system reads these signals like a weather forecast. Is today going to be calm, or is a storm coming? And without realizing it, she adapts. She becomes hyper-attuned. She becomes emotionally absorbent. She becomes the sponge. This isn't a conscious choice, it's survival. Children instinctively monitor the adults who care for them. And daughters, especially, tend to develop what psychologists call heightened emotional attunement, a learned pattern where your body reacts to another person's distress before your mind even registers it. That's why you can walk into your mother's house after months apart and instantly feel a shift inside you. That's why, even as an adult, a simple sigh from her can reopen a childhood tension you thought you outgrew. The tragic part is this. When a daughter absorbs too much of her mother's pain, she becomes disconnected from her own. She learns to feel for her mother before she learns to feel as herself. And over time, the line between the two blurs until she no longer knows where her mother's emotions end and hers begin. This is the emotional sponge effect, and it shapes far more of your identity than you might realize. There's a moment, often quiet, often unnoticed, when a daughter stops being the child in the family and becomes the emotional partner her mother never had. It usually begins when the father is physically present but emotionally unavailable, or when he's absent in every way that matters. Absent in conversations, absent in conflict, absent in the emotional labor that holds a family together. And in that empty space, the daughter steps in. Not because she chooses to, but because someone has to. She becomes the one who listens to her mother's disappointment, the one who witnesses her frustrations, the one who sits beside her in silence when the weight in the house becomes too heavy. A child should never know the intimate details of their parents' conflict. Yet many daughters do. They hear the late-night arguments, They feel the tension at the dinner table. They watch their mother crumble in ways that should only be seen by a partner, not a child. And slowly, something shifts. The daughter is no longer just a daughter. She becomes the emotional substitute, the confidant, the stabilizer, the one who keeps the household from falling apart. Psychologists call this role reversal, a form of emotional parentification where the child becomes the caregiver. But the daughter doesn't know that. All she knows is that when her mother is hurting, she feels responsible. When her mother is lonely, she fills the space. When her mother breaks, she gathers the pieces. And years later, she wonders why she feels drawn to relationships where she must rescue, repair, or hold everything together. The truth is, she learned that role long before she ever fell in love. There's a type of closeness between a mother and daughter that looks loving from the outside, but feels suffocating on the inside. It's the kind of closeness where the daughter isn't treated as a child. She's treated as a stand-in partner, not physically, but emotionally. This is what psychologists call emotional incest. A painful dynamic where a parent relies on their child for the emotional support, validation, and intimacy that should come from another adult. And it doesn't start with something dramatic. It starts quietly. A mother begins sharing the details of her marriage. She vents about the father's failures. She treats her daughter like a therapist, a confidant, a teammate in her disappointment. She says things like, "You're the only one who understands me. If it weren't for you, I don't know what I'd do. I can't talk to your father, only you get me." On the surface, it sounds like trust, connection, even love. But for a child, it's a trap, because the daughter learns that her worth comes from tending to her mother's wounds. She learns to anticipate her mother's needs before she learns how to recognize her own. She becomes emotionally fused, unable to tell where her mother's feelings end and hers begin. And the cost is heavy. A daughter who is treated like a partner grows up without ever truly experiencing childhood. She becomes someone who knows how to comfort others, but struggles to receive comfort herself. She becomes someone who gives endlessly, but feels guilty the moment she wants something for her own life. This is the hidden wound of emotional incest. A bond that feels like love, but steals the space a daughter needs to become her own person. There's a kind of theft that doesn't look like stealing at all. No yelling, no violence, no dramatic scenes, just a slow, steady draining of space, of identity, of emotional oxygen. This is what happens when a mother uses her daughter as her primary outlet for stress, sadness, and frustration. It's called emotional dumping, and for a child, it's suffocating. It starts with moments that seem harmless. A mother crying to her daughter after a long day. A mother unloading her anger about the father. A mother confessing fears she has never shared with anyone else. But little by little, the daughter stops being a child with her own inner world and becomes a container for someone else's inner chaos. She learns to sit quietly and absorb it all. She learns that her own feelings must wait. She learns that being a good daughter means making herself small so her mother's emotions have room to exist. And over time, something painful happens. Her sense of self starts to erode. She can describe her mother's emotions with perfect precision. But if you ask her what she feels, she hesitates. She freezes. She second guesses herself. Because emotional dumping doesn't just overwhelm a child. It rewires her identity. She becomes someone who knows how to carry others, but not herself. Someone who understands other people's emotional storms, but has no idea how to navigate her own. And as she grows older, this emptiness follows her. Like a shadow, shaped by a life spent holding space for everyone but herself. Some daughters grow up carrying something heavier than anyone around them realizes: the belief that other people's emotions are their responsibility. It begins in childhood, when they learn to anticipate their mother's mood before they understand their own. When they clean up silence, tension, disappointment, not because they want to, but because the family feels unsafe unless they are emotionally alert. And this hyper-responsibility doesn't stay in childhood. It follows them like a quiet script written into their nervous system. As adults, these daughters become the ones who apologize first, even when they're not wrong, soften their voice so no one feels offended. Check the emotional temperature of a room before sitting down, Jeans. Feel anxious when someone else is upset, even if it has nothing to do with them. Take on the role of mediator, peacekeeper, healer, therapist, emotional manager. They're the friend everyone vents to, the partner who understands, the co-worker who absorbs pressure so the team feels stable, the person who feels guilty for resting, guilty for saying no, guilty for having needs. But beneath all this caretaking lies a deeper truth. These daughters were trained to ignore the signals of their own body. A slight frown from someone else makes their chest tighten. A shift in tone makes their heart race. A moment of conflict makes them shrink into the smallest version of themselves, trying to prevent an explosion that isn't even happening. They mistake hypervigilance for kindness. They mistake self-abandonment for love. They mistake being needed for being valued. And the saddest part? When you spend your whole life managing everyone else's emotions, you forget how to feel your own. You forget what peace feels like. You forget that your emotional world matters too, not just as a reaction to others, but as something real, alive, and deserving of attention. This is the silent burden carried by daughters who were raised to be emotional adults long before they ever had a chance to simply be children. When a daughter grows up carrying her mother's emotions, she doesn't just grow up fast. She grows up shaped by a role she never chose. And the consequences show up most clearly in adulthood, especially in love. These daughters enter relationships with a quiet, unconscious script. I must take care of their emotions or they will leave. If they're upset, it's my fault. If I don't fix this, everything will fall apart. So they become caretakers instead of partners. They pour, soothe, stabilize, overextend everything they once did for their mother. But this time, it's for a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a spouse, a friend, a boss, anyone who feels remotely fragile. And because they learn that emotional closeness means carrying someone else, they often attract people who need rescuing. The wounded, the avoidant, the chaotic, the emotionally unavailable. It feels familiar. It feels like home. It feels like something they know how to survive, but not something they know how to feel safe in. This is why many daughters raised in emotional parentification struggle with trust. They flinch at vulnerability. They overthink silence. They brace for abandonment at the slightest shift in tone. Their nervous system equates love with instability because that's the only version of love they ever learned. And underneath all of it lies a heartbreaking truth. They don't know how to receive love. Real love. Steady love. Love that doesn't require saving anyone. So when someone treats them gently, they doubt it. When someone offers stability, they push it away. When someone gives them consistency, they don't know what to do with it because stability feels foreign and chaos feels familiar. And unless this pattern is confronted, something painful happens. They recreate the very dynamic they once survived. Not because they want to, but because the nervous system returns to what it knows. Home, even when it hurts, can feel easier than healing. There comes a moment, often in your late 20s, sometimes much later, when you suddenly realize something terrifying and freeing at the same time. You are still living inside the emotional world you inherited from your mother. Her fears became your instincts. Her wounds became your reflexes. Her silence became your discomfort. Her sadness became the lens through which you learned to understand love. And breaking this pattern isn't about blaming her. It's about finally choosing yourself. The first step is awareness, noticing when you're slipping into the role of rescuer, mediator, or emotional caretaker. When you feel your chest tighten at someone else's disappointment. When you apologize simply because someone exhaled too loudly. When you feel responsible for moods that don't belong to you. The second step is emotional individuation, learning to separate her story from your story. Her marriage is not your template. Her loneliness is not your destiny. Her fears are not your inheritance. You can hold compassion for her without carrying her pain on your back. The third step is reparenting yourself, giving yourself the emotional support you never received, speaking to yourself with warmth instead of criticism, validating your needs without guilt, learning to ask, what do I feel? What do I want? What do I need right now? And finally, breaking the pattern means giving yourself permission to stop performing emotional labor you never should have been responsible for. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to let other adults handle their own emotions, even if that adult is your mother. You're not abandoning her. You're reclaiming yourself. Because healing doesn't mean carrying the past. Healing means finally putting it down. To the mothers, if no one has ever said this to you, let me say it now. You carried more than any one person should ever have to carry. You weren't given the emotional support you needed, so you leaned on the only person who felt safe, your daughter. And you didn't do this because you were cruel or careless. You did it because you were hurting, because no one ever taught you another way. But here is the truth with both compassion and clarity. Your daughter was never meant to be your emotional anchor. She was never meant to hold the weight of your marriage, your disappointments, your loneliness, or your unprocessed pain. She deserved the freedom to be a child, not the duty to be your comfort. And healing for you begins with acknowledging that burden and gently choosing not to pass it on. To the daughters, your mother's pain is real, but so is yours. And your life does not have to be an extension of hers. You are allowed to step out of the emotional legacy you inherited. You are allowed to build relationships that feel safe, stable, and mutual. You are allowed to have needs without guilt, boundaries without shame, and peace without apology. Loving your mother doesn't mean carrying her wounds. Compassion doesn't mean self-abandonment. You can honor her story, while still choosing a different one for yourself. And the moment you realize that, something shifts quietly, powerfully, irrevocably. You finally begin to belong to your own life. There is a moment in healing when something inside you finally loosens. A soft, quiet realization that you were never meant to live trapped inside someone else's story. You are allowed to outgrow the pain you inherited. You are allowed to choose peace over obligation. And you are allowed to become a woman who belongs fully, finally, beautifully to herself. If this video helped you feel seen, stay a little longer. We talk about the parts of the human heart that rarely get words. And if any part of this touched you, tell me in the comments. Your story matters here. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. You deserve a space where your healing is honored.